if you're taking a lot of your learning on the internet, you get thrust into quite extreme spaces. It's all or nothing, and I think people find that very, very overwhelming.
When we know better, we do better. This podcast is brought to you by Redwings Horse Sanctuary and Equilibrium Products.
Hello, happy Wednesday.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, how was your week?
Yeah, it was really good, thank you. I haven't had like a hugely exciting week, I suppose. I mean, we've had a lot going on, but kind of just like normal stuff, I guess. One thing I did do is I got to go and have some training with my coach in person. So Claire Gallimore, and we rode too, but we did the groundwork first. And I just feel so much like my inspiration cup got refilled. So for a bit of background, Claire was the person who enlightened me to a different way of doing things. So like I was trained like the standard approach, I'm doing some air quotes, for many, many years, backing and starting. And it was always very considered with the horse, I wasn't chasing them around and all of that sort of thing. But I would sort of start in the middle, basically, from what my current kind of standards, I guess. And I had this pony, Kenko, and if you'd have followed me for a long time, you'll remember Kenko, and she was quite problematic. She used to bronk every now and then, and I never got to the bottom of why. Having my time again, I'd do so many things differently, but she also became very scared of having a rider, so she'd be scared of the rider, and then the rider would become scared of her, and then you'd end up like pulling her in the mouth by mistake, because she'd kind of shoot forward reins, and I was like, this isn't working. And my friend Millie, who I talk about a lot, she suggested I'd had some lessons with Claire, because it was like this totally different way of doing things. And Claire had just spent 4 or 5 years with Tristan Tucker in Holland. So we started working together, and I was like, okay, I know nothing. I remember the first lesson I had, and I was like, okay, I don't even know how to ride a 20-metre circle. It was so, like my first ridden lesson, we did a lot on the ground first, but I could just completely different way of doing things. And now it is just the way that I do things, it's not different. But getting to have some training again with her this week, I took Zora and I took my little Belle, the horse that got given to me for £1. And yeah, just lovely to feel like there are solutions to the questions, if that makes sense, that don't involve force or shoving or more tack or more pressure or any of those things, but like looking at the way the horse works biomechanically, looking at the way they feel in their body, looking at the way they pattern, like what patterns they use, and then working through it together just feels so good. And I also think that, remember talking about giving a bit of responsibility to somebody else, like that is huge for me. Like I have a lot of responsibility on me with other people's horses. Like people send their horses to me and I have to have the answers, and I do have the answers, but sometimes it's nice to just say, excuse me, do you have the answer? And they go, yes, here's the answer. And you say, oh, lovely, thank you, that feels really good. So it was wonderful. And I never want to stop learning. Like that feels like a really important thing to say. And yeah, I just feel really inspired, and like my cup of learning has been filled up this week, and I'm very grateful. How's your week been? How was camp? We must hear about camp. Well, I sort of know a bit about camp, because we had a little catch up
during camp.
Yeah.
Just can't stay off the phone from one another. No, it was a moment of crisis, and Miri was great. I will get into that, but before I get into camp, a couple of interesting things happened at camp. But today there was a gridwork clinic at my yard, and this woman was walking out of the clinic before mine, and she had this lovely grey mare. She had an Equitex, and I was like, oh, Equitex, and I was like looking at the colour, and she goes, oh, she was like, I follow you, like, on all your things. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. And obviously they're with Harley, so people recognise you when you're with Harley, because big orange gorgeous boy. And she was like, oh yeah, I listen to the podcast every week. And she said, I've got young children, and when we're in the car driving to the childminders, they're always like, Mummy, can we listen to cars? And she's like, no, this is equestrian life. And it's
I love
super cute. So I hope maybe she's listening now in the car. It'll be a really meta moment. So, hi children, I'm so sorry that you can't listen to the Disney things or the
But you will learn something today potentially about holistic rehab and maybe a different side of the veterinary side of things. But you will get to listen to cars again, Mum promises. Sorry if we've just stitched you up, but that was too good to not to say. I love that. I love that she's like, no, children, time for mummy. I'm going to listen to this equestrian life and learn something today.
I know. It was really cute. She had a really cute grey mare, so I hope she doesn't mind me saying that. I hope to see her again. And camp was really good. So I will preface this by saying the whole weekend was amazing. Harley and I did cross country together for the first time, went through water and stuff.
So
first
cool.
day, had a really tough time on the first day. It was like very, very busy. It was at Hickstead, and if you've ever been to Hickstead, it's like a big venue. There's like a huge venue actually, and there was a lot going on. And Harley and I were in a flat work lesson, and there's like tractors going up and down the outside of the school, taking water around. There's a generator right outside the school that's going. There's like little quad bikes spinning around all over the place. There's horses coming from every direction. And Harley, you can imagine, Harley's quite sensitive to noise and things, and he just completely over his limit. And the coach was really great. We had Liz Eaton, who is equitation with empathy, and she slowed everything down for everybody. But he, at one point, put in a huge spook, and I just came out the side door, and it didn't hurt. I had my body protector on. I was fine. But I found the rest of the lesson really, really, really difficult because I couldn't get him to relax. And normally, when we have a moment like that, I'm able to like reassess, bring everything back down, slow everything down, all the things we've talked about, and bring him back to me. And I couldn't do it. Even in walk, he just felt a bit on edge, and it's not a nice feeling. And I was feeling a bit over my limit, and I really struggled. Like I had a lump in my throat the whole lesson just because I felt like I was going to cry. And you're with all these people that you don't know, and like there's added pressure of feeling visible and stuff. So I struggled quite a lot. And that evening, I was thinking, have I come too soon? Have I overfaced him? Maybe we're not ready for this. Is this fair? And I was really spiralling about it. And I was thinking, do I take him home? And I sort of spoke to the organisers, who were amazing. The BHS organised it, a woman called Sonia and Alex, who helped out. And they were like, it's a really busy day. Like, it's not normally like this. That was really extreme. And it was extreme. Like, I would never expect a horse to cope with
For
that,
anyone
really.
that doesn't know what Hickstead is, it's not just like a couple of arenas. There's probably like 6 or 7 arenas. They hold the Hickstead Derby there, which is one of the biggest equestrian events in the entire show jumping calendar. And like obviously that wasn't going on at that time, but if you can imagine that kind of a volume of size of venue, there's a lot of capacity for a lot of chaos.
There's a lot going on. Yeah, they're like building a new arena at the moment, so they had JCBs around. Like, it was just a lot. So the next morning, I'm like hand grazing Harley, and I'm like quietly spiraling. And I actually searched on Spotify. I was like, maybe I can just find like a podcast about confidence, like Pippa Funnel or Piggy March. And ours came up, and I was like, well, I know what I would say. I need someone else to tell me what to say. So anyway.
You then rang me. We spoke.
I did, yeah. We were texting because you knew that I'd had a difficult time. And you were like, do you want to call me? And the walk from the stables down to breakfast is like a 10-minute walk. So I called Miri, and I was like, I'm not having a very nice time. I'm feeling a little bit worried about getting on today. And you were really good. Do you want to share what you said, if you can remember?
If I'll be honest, I can't remember. It was quite a while ago now. Go on, you go.
It was. Well, we talked it through, and you were like, okay, I think you should, when you get off the phone here, because we talked through a few things that I was worried about, and you were like, write this down so that you can keep coming back to it when your brain, because you're going to get off the phone and feel fine now, but you might not feel fine after breakfast, you might not feel fine when you're tacking up. And so I wrote down the list. Actually, let me get it out. I'll tell you exactly what I wrote.
Because I think I said, one of the things I do remember saying was, like, go work out what does feel comfortable.
Yeah,
like
where is your baseline? So like you were like, you're here to have a nice time. This is one of the things. You were like, if all you do today is get on, because we were meant to be doing show jumping and cross country, and you were like, if all you do is get on and walk around the outside of the arena and everyone else is jumping and doing whatever, you were like, that's fine. That's your baseline. And if that's what you and Harley need to learn that day, that's what you do. And you were like...
Yeah, and I actually said even before, I said as well, like, that might not even be the baseline. Turning up to the arena might be the baseline. Hanging out next to the arena and him being like, oh my God, and then him settling, and then you being able to get on. And I think I encouraged you to, like, work out what isn't stressful.
Yes.
That was the
groundwork.
key.
And I took my groundwork halter, like, just in case. I always do when I'm travelling, actually. And you were talking about, you know, you don't owe the coach anything. Sorry, Miri just smacked something. You know, you don't owe the coach anything. You're there, you know, to have a nice time. So anyway, actually, we had a really lovely day on Saturday. We were in the show jumping arena. We went and did cross country. We went in and out of the water. And there was something that was a really, really lovely learning moment for me in the cross country. So we'd done this little step and we were on top of a bigger step and we were just walking down them. And Harley was like hesitating and I was like, oh, I know it's me because I'm afraid he's going to like leap off the top. And because of my fall the day before, I was feeling a little bit like aware of my leg and seat position and not feeling super stable. And she was like, well, that's a really interesting thing to talk about because we should never be putting a horse in a position where they are having to explode over something. She was like, because they're not in a learning phase. You're not in a learning phase. You've basically just pushed them out of fear. And she gave us this story of a rider who had a horse at, I don't know what level it was, like eventing, but it was pretty high. It was like 2-star, 3-star. And they said that they used to be great, and then one time going through the water they had to push a little bit to get the horse through the water, and the next time they had to push a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and eventually the horse just point blank stopped, like completely refused to go in the water, and they actually ended up stopping eventing, just retiring from eventing because the horse just wouldn't go through the water. And when they traced it back, there had been a moment on one run where the horse had gone into the water and landed in some sort of just like a little hole and lost a little bit of confidence. And Liz was saying, you know, that it's really, really important when a horse says no, when we're on things like cross country, that we don't push them in that moment and lose their trust and push them through the fear. And so in our group, we all had, relatively speaking, we all had quite green horses. And so we were talking a lot about that feeling of like the encouraging leg and the confidence giving reins and leg and contact, but not pushing when the horse has point blank said no, like I can't do it. Giving them a moment to process and then representing. So that was really cool. And Harley and I ended up just kind of trotting around, cantering and bumbling over things. And it was really cute because I felt like his vibe felt very like curious and open as opposed to sort of like running towards things out of fear that I was holding him together, which I think is sometimes the way you get taught to do cross country is like leg on, hands, contact, you know, it's all quite pressurized.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that's a really lovely way of thinking about things because I think that so often that is the, you know, that is the go-to when we don't know how to fix something or like the horse is saying it's unsure. We just go to make them, basically.
Yeah.
And that's where, that's a really nice way of looking at it. Like you support them and you hold their hand, but you don't like shove them towards it. I suppose I often think about these things in like human analogies. I find that really useful. I don't know whether it's just the way my brain works, but for me it's like if you had a child and they were scared to go in their lower school classroom, maybe it's because I was actually a bit scared to go to school when I was little. Probably I'm talking about some trauma when I was a child. If my parent had stood behind me and shoved me over the threshold, I'd have been like, excuse me, pal. I wouldn't have said that because that's quite a grown-up thing to say, but I'd have been like, Mum, why? Why are you doing that? But if she was there with me and she stopped at the threshold with me and said, oh, look at all the lovely colours in the classroom, Miriam. Oh, why don't we go and see about the books over there? And she held my hand and she took me. I could have a little cry thinking about this. Because, like, I'm talking about my inner child here. You know, that is healing. That is guiding. That is compassionate. That is loving. And that is what we can be. And that's what you were for Harley on that second day. Isn't that lovely?
I know. I know.
Love
and
that.
she
Done.
did, you know.
She sounds great, this coach. Tag her in the show notes.
100%, she's great. Equitation with empathy. Because I looked up the coaches before I went thinking, I just want to check that we're aligned. I mean, obviously the BHS are going to get you great coaches, but when I saw that, I was like, oh, I love this. And then I saw some of the things she'd written and I was like, I really like this. But yeah, I mean,
Was she
said
older?
with her,
How
yeah, a little bit older. Oh God, I'm terrible with ages, but she's definitely got amazing experience and she actually works with some really high level riders. My friend and I were laughing about this after camp. We were like, here she is teaching us to go up and down hills and she's over there teaching so-and-so to go around badminton, but that doesn't matter.
No, and I think that's a really important thing to remember. Like, if you're a coach that is keen to teach like the right way and you have an ethos, who cares? Like, I love teaching kids the groundwork. I'm like, oh, you're interested in learning about groundwork and empathy and noticing when your pony looks scared, or understanding about balance or posture or whatever it might be. Here, please, come and hold the rope. Let's learn.
I love that. And actually, two more things to say. One was, because I've been feeling a little bit then insecure about my lower leg and thinking, oh, I shouldn't have been coming off these big spooks. My coach was firstly like, how many times have you fallen off Harley? And I was like, 3 times. And she was like, yeah, okay. I mean, it's literally nothing, Rhiannon. She was like, you have a young horse. Sometimes you're going to come off. And what we did actually in our last lesson was spent a lot of time looking at my seat and how to make my seat more stable. Lots of like seat work, lots of standing in the up when we're trotting and cantering. She made me canter and like lose my stirrups and then find them again. And like, I know, one by one.
Yeah.
Harley was in a very good mood. He was great. He was like a little...
I was going to say, if he was in his spooky boppy mood, then probably
not so fun. What are they called, those horses that... vaulting horses, you know, when they just go round? So we were on a big 20-metre circle, and Harley, like, I'm like doing, you know, sitting for 5, standing for 5, sitting, all this stuff. And Hannah, my coach, just goes, he loves this. She was like, he thinks this is great. He's bobbling around in his little trot. She was like, I think this is quite hypnotic for him. Like, I'm not really doing anything with the rein. She was like, he thinks it's great. He's not under any pressure. We're not
asking. You know what is very interesting is you were really focusing on you in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so he was able to focus on him.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think those moments are more powerful than we think they are, because not only is he really receptive to you being aware of yourself, but he's having to think a bit more for himself. So what an exercise I often get people to do is, as they're riding around the arena, I get them to look up to the markers. Like if they're feeling a bit nervous or they're over focusing on something, you're like, what marker's next? And I even get them to say sentences. I'm like, B for the beautiful butterfly. It sounds a bit basic, right? But the distraction almost from what's my horse doing? Oh my God, am I feeling this? What's happening? That can be really powerful. So by getting you to be doing those things, she was essentially doing the same thing. I love that. Really good.
I know, me too. Final thing that happened this week.
Oh yeah, keep going. Goodness, you've had busy old work. No, this is great. I love it. Keep going.
Well, I finally realised that Gareth Hughes and Ruby Hughes are related.
The fact that honestly, I'm like, how did you not know that? They look like the male and female version of each other, because they're both like beautifully like long-legged humans. Honestly, hilarious.
It just never occurred to me. And the only reason I found out was because Ruby Hughes put up this... Was it Ruby or Gareth? I think it might have been Gareth. Put up this hilarious TikTok of her riding and Gareth with 2, feed stirrers. He's got 2 feed stirrers and he's like marshalling, I'm waving my arms, like an airport marshal, her centre line.
He was quite good at it. I feel like he actually went and watched a video on what they do.
It was quite good.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
While she did her Grand Prix centre line, so she's like doing the piaffe, and then she's passaging towards him and he's waving his arms like to create the rhythm of the passage, and then he waves them a bit quicker or a bit different for the piaffe. Yes. It was fantastic. It was a great bit of social media, wasn't it?
It was so good. He was like bringing them together towards like where the halt needed to be. It was very funny. Anyway, and in the caption she's like, oh, Dad doing this, and I was like, huh? Dad? And then it all clicked. So there we are.
Go. I never forget that she's really young. I think she might be 17. I don't think she's very old at all. I think she has just learned how to drive, so I do think she's 17. But I remember watching the video of her when she was really little riding Valegro, and because Carl Hester's her godfather.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Oh.
Still didn't make sense to you at that point, back then? No? Either way, wonderful.
If I followed along at that point. But I really
a wonderful
very much
use for the internet. Because there's some utter shit on the internet regularly, isn't there? But that was a lovely moment. So, should we introduce our guest?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've spoken a little bit about this. So we have had many a conversation around rehab, and we wanted to have somebody on who I believe is a real specialist in rehab. So Lily Wilson is a holistic vet. She's a normal vet, like a fully qualified veterinary surgeon. But Lily and I came to work together because, well, of various different horses, but Blondie particularly, because Blondie isn't very tolerant of normal vets. My everyday vet calls her the assassin. So if that tells you everything you need to know. Seriously, he's a funny older guy. I've known him since I was 18, so like we have a good relationship. But like she will get you before you get her because she's had bad experiences, pain in her body, all of those things complicated. So she's really needle shy and...
How does she know they're vets? Is that a really stupid question? Is it because they smell
they all smell different?
Like, yeah.
A bit like disinfectant. And the vibe of, horses know your intention way before you have thought you said it.
Yeah, that's true.
Body you appear in a certain way. She saw the acupuncture vet again this week and actually had a really positive experience with her. But she comes with it again with a very different vibe, and she definitely doesn't smell like a vet because she doesn't do anything clinically. She does acupuncture and then like Chinese medicine herbs. So Lily and I have spoken lots of times. She has an online consultation service, and she now also offers like rehabilitation livery herself. Like veterinary rehabilitation. It's really interesting. I'll let her tell us more about that. But one of the more recent times that I've worked with Lily was when I took Blondie to the vets last year, and I found out, I kind of finally plucked up the courage to go and have some imaging done, some like diagnostic stuff, because her behaviour was just plateauing. I just didn't feel like things were going in the right direction. I'd put her on Regulate as well, so I'd ruled out that the hormones were the contributing factor, because her hormones were essentially muted, basically.
Yeah.
And I got this diagnosis of PSD, so proximal suspensory desmitis. It basically means that the suspensories hurt and they have been under strain for an extended period of time. Now, it can mean that they actually have holes in them, so like damage to the structure, or it can just be scarring. And that is what was found in Blondie's suspensory. So you get like an irregular scan. Now, the diagnosis of that was not easy. They did a nerve block. They managed to do one nerve block. And she was, the guy was wearing a hard hat. It was not easy for her or anyone involved. And she was actually amazing. And I'm so proud of her for having gone through it. And she really trusted me through it. But it was not an easy day by any stretch. But we did get a diagnosis, and I was very grateful of that. But I was offered two options, and that was it. I was offered surgical, so neurectomy, so a removal of the nerve in the suspensory to essentially just take away the pain, but not really take away the cause as such. Like, you're not actually dealing with why it's happened, you're just removing the happened. Or a general anaesthetic, which you'd have to have surgery for, general anaesthetic, a lot of risk. Or I was offered another general anaesthetic, and that she just had the area medicated with steroid. And when me and the vet sat down on the bench at the end of the day to discuss it, both of us pretty knackered after the quite intense day of investigation, I was like, and those are my only options. He was like, yeah. And I was like, right. And I said, they're both quite risky options. And I said, and what would be your kind of like rehabilitation longer term? And he was like, yeah, well, you could pretty much ride straight away if she had the steroid. And I was like, but she's lame. And there's a reason for her to be lame. And the steroid would, although reduce the inflammation and maybe the discomfort, it probably wouldn't take away the reason why this has happened. And I was in my head, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, you're giving me two options, but none of them seem like they're actually going to solve why this has happened in the first place.
Yeah.
And there are obviously sometimes with injuries, they just happen and you have to treat them as they have happened. Like, I had a horse that broke its shoulder. I just had to treat that with a surgical option of fixing it. And that was it. But this felt different. It didn't feel like I had like a one-stop shop solution. So I spoke to Lily. And we have treated Blondie conservatively, you'd call it. So with no medication, with nothing other than unlearning where the root came from. So I'll explain this before Lily comes on, and then maybe she'll talk about it a bit more. But we talked a lot about hind foot balance in Blondie's hind feet, because the suspensory attaches to the hoof, essentially. And there's something called plantar angle. So it's the angle of the pedal bone in their hind feet. And if that angle is a negative degree, so it's up at the toe and down at the heel, what that does is it puts more pressure through all of the hind end structures, so the suspensory, the hamstrings, into the SI, and actually all the way through into their mouth. The whole horse is completely connected like a big rubber band. And her plantar angle was 0 degrees, so it was completely flat. So it wasn't positive, meaning slightly raised at the heel and down at the toe, which is what we want it to be. We want it to be like a 3 to 5 degree angle. It was completely at a 0. When we took hindfoot x-rays, much to my vet's disapproval on the day, he was like, well, why do you want to do that? And I said, because I'm aware of this. I knew about this, and I had heard about hindfoot angle and balance being really relevant. It was a 0. It's meant that we've trimmed her differently. We've then changed her balance, but like none of the time did she go on box rest. None of the time did she have anything other than what her body did for itself, really. And then we've like supported that. Go on.
Well, I know we're going to get into the detail of it, but as someone who's never dealt with a holistic vet or anything, one of the biggest things I think overwhelming things to take away from this conversation, hopefully, is even if a professional is saying you have this option or this is what I think, it doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. 100%. And if you have, with Blondie's injury, you giving it a few days before you decided what to do with that injury is not going to change. It's 100%. Not like you have to make a decision in the next 30 minutes, and therefore you have grace to go and find other options. And so I think there's something about feeling comfortable in your own ability to go and have the conversations with other professionals, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable. You don't have to tell the other people that you're doing it if you don't want to. I mean, it's your horse.
Yeah,
but I quite like that as a thread to remember if you're coming at this like I am for the first time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to like look at veterinary as, and that's what I explain to people a lot when we have consultation calls, because I understand how hard this is sometimes to be on your own in this circumstance and be like, I don't know if I can challenge it or I can seek a second opinion or whatever it is. But like, it's okay to see the investigation as that on its own, and then you can choose your treatment options as you go on. Of course, your horse got a broken leg, like my horse with a broken shoulder. I didn't have many options. That was it. It was, end of the road or surgical. So for me, it's like, how can we use that, the imaging, the scanning, the nerve blocking as information to then guide us with our future plans, basically, whatever those may be, right?
Yeah. Love it.
Should we go say hi to, let's get Lily on.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Every year, hundreds of horses, ponies and donkeys in the UK are left neglected, abandoned or abused. Redwings Horse Sanctuary is one of the UK's largest horse charities, and they are doing something incredible about it. With over 1,500 rescued residents in their care, Redwings give each one a safe home for life. And not just food and shelter, but the specialist veterinary treatment, rehabilitation and love that they truly need to heal. None of this is possible without you guys. Ongoing support and kind donations are what make this vital work happen. From emergency rescues to lifelong sanctuary, every pound truly helps change a life. To find out more or to donate, visit redwings.org.uk and be part of something that gives these animals the second chance they deserve. If you don't feel like you can donate today, but you do feel like you still want to show your support, please head over to the Redwings Instagram or Facebook page, and just liking, sharing, commenting can really help a charity such as Redwings to do the amazing work that they do. After some mild technical difficulties, mild is a small word, we actually had to call Amy up and get her to come and fix this.
Poor Amy. She had Easter weekend off and we called her in.
Welcome to the podcast, Lily Wilson. Thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate your giving us your time.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
No worries at all. Do you want to start by giving us a little bit of insight? I talked about you a bit prior to you coming on, but do you want to give us a bit of insight into kind of what you do, and maybe we can then ask some questions from there?
Yeah. So I graduated from the Royal Vet College in 2016, and then I worked in general mixed practice for the first sort of about 7 years. And then I started to change over into more what I'm doing now, a bit gradually, with some small animal emergency and critical care work in there for a little while, because I have a really strong interest in pain physiology and really loved the critical care aspect of looking after patients. So I thought I might go down that road for a little while, but realised that really it was more the pain physiology thing. And then had a particular horse that has really helped to direct me down this path. So what I'm doing now is all equine now. Occasionally, I do help people with their dogs, but it's predominantly equine now. And what I'm really focusing on is more, what I felt like I was doing in general practice was a lot of putting out fires and not necessarily getting to the really deep-rooted causes of things. And that was very frustrating, because when I had an owner who really wanted to get to the deep-rooted causes, I didn't have time for them, because your diary is so jam-packed, in general practice, and because you need to get to everybody's sick animal. And that definitely has its very important place. And then another very important thing is, one, the prevention of those kinds of fires in the first place, and two, once they happen, to kind of do a bit of forensics of looking at why, and not just how do we treat this right now, but what does this reflect about what we maybe needed to change a bit earlier, or what we need to change now, so that they can actually thrive rather than just recover to a kind of an okay state. I'm really keen on really thriving and flourishing, as opposed to just kind of ticking along, really.
Like seeing the rehab almost like an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
To press the reset button and start again in a better way.
Yes.
Before. Go on, Rhi. What were you going to say?
Well, it's really interesting that you talk about putting out fires, because before you joined, one of the things that I said was that maybe this conversation is an interesting moment to say, if your vet is saying you've got this option or this option and nothing else, it's okay if you've got the time, as in your horse is in immediate pain, to have a decision that needs to be made in 30 minutes or whatever, to go and ask for another opinion. And actually, if what you're saying is most vets are having to just put out fires and are really busy because of their diaries, it almost, as an owner, you should feel even more comfortable being like, okay, I know that my vet is probably looking at it from this angle. I have permission in myself to go and look at the wider remit. Does that feel accurate?
Yes, absolutely. And it's also quite important to, again, this is sort of in a non-judgmental, compassionate way, is to understand that different vets are coming at it with very different backgrounds and interests and level of expertise and skill and experience. So you might have a vet who has seen a lot of a particular type of case and so is very experienced. You could then have two different scenarios from that point, where they have a lot of experience with one particular way of addressing that and not very much experience with alternative ways of addressing that. Or you could have a vet who is very generalised in practice and hasn't seen a lot of this particular case. So there's lots of scenarios for where the vet is coming from with the advice that they give. And that maybe can seem a bit scary sometimes, because you kind of would think, well, the vet's supposed to know the answer. But there's this massive flashing lights, it depends thing that comes up in most situations, which just understanding where they're coming from in that regard. And even things like suggesting an approach that they are more familiar with is actually the more responsible thing for them to do, because if they're going to be delivering that, then it's better that they deliver something that they're practiced at. But it may be in your particular scenario, maybe your individual horse's case, or maybe your setup and what you can do long term. It might be that a different solution is actually better in your unique case. or there might be a solution that takes into account a bit more of the wider context.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I think I encourage people to think about, is that, like, where is the vet's experience arisen from, and what is that where is that gonna lead you, and that it's okay to take their opinion, but it's also okay to say, I think maybe I want a wider stance on this, potentially.
Yes.
Was there a time in your career where you kind of pivoted? Can you tell us a bit more about the horse that maybe that shifted things? Because I have had many a horse in my life that has shifted my perspective, and you and I have worked together with Blondie, who is one of them, who has shifted my perspective massively. So yeah, I'd love to hear, tell us their name, and do you still have them, and all of those things.
Yeah, so you might hear him in the background because he's calling intermittently now.
Oh.
He's called Sonny, and I got him as a yearling when I was very much in the stage of sort of learning my craft in general mixed practice. And what he helped me to realise, so when I first got him, I actually found him quite difficult to handle. He was only a little baby and nothing particularly difficult, but it just really didn't feel harmonious. And what I realised, it was actually a bit of a wake-up call in a way, was that I had been so busy in learning my skills and knowledge as a general practice vet when I first came out of vet school, that I had actually become a bit detached from the actual working with the individual animal as opposed to the case. This is a case that you're working on, a medical case. And he really opened up my eyes to the fact that I'd a little bit lost my way in that regard. I didn't feel very much like myself. There was quite a lot of personal growth stuff that happened out of that, which was incredibly helpful. Quite a few life decisions that I made on the back of that, which have helped me to be able to help people and their horses better now. And then, since that point, he has then had a number of veterinary things where what I learnt in a more conventional sense was not going to work for one reason or another, or I found was actually not medically particularly satisfactory. So he's presented various things. I think that he's a teacher for sure, because once I think that I've got on top of something, then he'll present some other kind of challenge. So he's actually also the reason for my needle shyness online course, because he was extremely needle shy and very, very difficult to reverse. So I've had to explore so many different avenues with just the one horse. And then, of course, I've explored it with multiple horses now. So that was one thing with him. And then he took me off down avenues to do with foot function and dental alignment, head shaking, posture.
Wow.
Yeah. And motivation in training and just all sorts. Nutrition.
That's so interesting. And so, because I've dealt with a horse, Blondie's very needle shy, as you learnt, because you came and helped, utilised her with some video and stuff in the needle shyness course. But she has long-term pain in her body, as we've learnt, through PSSM, PSD, bad training, bad so much in her life. So I believe her needle shyness, and I think we talked about that, is because of sort of alternate pain in the body, potentially. If you've had him since a yearling, do you think that was the case for him, or did it come somewhere? Do you think it came somewhere else?
Well, so I castrated him at 18 months old with a colleague. So we did it in my stable at home. And my work colleague restrained him very, very strongly for the IV. And so there's been a lot of trauma to undo, which I was a part of. And I've had to do a lot of forgiving myself for that. And that was part of me realising this is really not how I want to do things anymore. Not that I ever would condone any kind of rough treatment anyway, even, in that stage of my career. But it was kind of normalised, this very strong level of restraint, because you have a long list of patients to get through, and you've got stuff to get done, and it is for their well-being. But that's a bit of a dodgy argument for using that level of restraint. And it was way too strong. He was only a baby. And there was a lot of emotional trauma in there. And I think probably some physical trauma on his body as well from that level of restraint. Yeah.
Oh, and I think it's... even just from one incident, that's so interesting. And that's what we don't... I don't think people acknowledge, is that just that one moment in time...
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that, because the head and the use of headgear, even if it's quite a kind head collar or halter, it can have some really wide-ranging body effects and some emotional and cognitive effects as well on them, long-term and short-term.
It's also just a really powerful thing to say, because I think if people go and look you up after this, they'll think, oh my goodness, she's so, like, if we're looking at a spectrum of vets, like, she's so kind of forward-thinking and kind and holistic, and particularly the people I think who listen to this podcast are on their own journeys with their horse. And I've done it. I've had sessions where I've been like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Even if it's not something that bad, you're like, I wish I could have done that differently. I wish I hadn't done this. And so hearing that someone who I think a lot of people would look up to is also like, hey, I've also done things that I look back on and think, no, I wish I didn't do that. And sometimes we can only learn through... we learn what we learn, and then we grow and we change, and that's the whole point, right? But I think it's a really powerful thing to do that, to say that.
What's that good phrase? When we know better, we do better.
Yeah. And there's no point in having a mind if you can't change it. That's a James O'Brien special.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And it's just that time element that I think is so important. And like... I had a farrier previously, and I remember when we had, I deal with a lot of tricky, complicated horses, and giving a foot for the farrier is a big give over for a horse, isn't it? You're taking away their flight response, you're asking for a completely different proprioceptive balance, all of these things. I have to try and sound clever in front of Lily, by the way, because I feel like I need to know what I'm talking about. But the interesting thing is we had a conversation once. I can't remember what young horse it was, and he was really trying to get it done. Right, he was like hanging on a bit too long, and the horse was hopping about a bit, and I was like, could we just put the foot down, take a breath? And he said to me, oh, the horse just wants me to get it over and done with. And I thought, this guy's a professional, and that was his belief. He believed that the horse just wanted to be done, like for him to go as fast as he could. And I was like, well, no, that's definitely not what's going on, and can we please just slow down? And he did, and he was very good, but that was what he was taking with him everywhere he went. And I think it's a really common opinion, like bish bash bosh, get it done, give the injection, let's do it as fast as we can, and then the horse won't be worried about it. When actually we learn that slowing down is the best way to regulate your nervous system. So
so we've talked a bit about the way not to do it, or maybe the way that traditional vets do things. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about, if we're not just putting out the fire, what is it that you do? Do you have I don't know if you have a horse in mind, or you can give us an idea in general of your process, but I would love to hear how you go about it.
Yeah. So actually I was just going to say something about the slowing down, and then I'll answer that question.
Yeah, good. Go for it.
There's a definite big life lesson that I've learnt in that regard, which is why on earth are we in such a hurry all the time anyway? Because when you think about why are we in a hurry, and it's usually because of some kind of pressure that is, now this is like a really big picture thing to say, but it's actually a cultural and a societal pressure to be productive.
Yep.
And if you're not doing that, you're somehow, especially if you're an employee, you're somehow not pulling your weight, or your work ethic is not up to scratch, or you're not seeing as many patients, and you're leaving it to other people, and that kind of thing. So I think that as individuals, we obviously need to see how we can each as individuals try to work at a pace that doesn't compromise what the horses are telling us, which is a very helpful lesson for us. And then also understand understand that you are also part of a system that is not helping. So if you're struggling with that, that is why.
And we could talk about this all day.
Yeah, and
We've talked
another
about this
parallel,
kind of
is that we put our horses in a similar. So in domesticating ourselves in that way, we've also imposed that on our horses, and a lot of so-called problems, sort of in air quotes, that horses have are because we are trying to crowbar them into that model, and they just don't need that. And it's really helpful of them to tell us.
There's also the whole like a horse is only you only want the horse if it's productive for you, and all the conversations about retirement and passing over horses that can't be ridden. But that's another conversation. For
you often hear people. I actually correct people, no matter who they are or what they're saying. I correct people when they say the word "use" when it comes to a horse. Oh, he was being used for the daughter, or oh, we want to use him to do this. I'm like, I cannot have this conversation with you if you're going to speak like that about an animal. With the
your language is so important.
Yeah, because that takes away so much like importance of the being. It's just like, I use the car to get from A to B. I use the horse to go cross country. I think makes me thanks.
Yes,
tough.
Absolutely.
It's like it.
Yeah, so that actually it does follow on quite well to describe. Yes, that's important. To describe my sort of thought framework for rather than putting out fires, to go to the deep-rooted causes. So I've kind of identified these 4 deep roots that are kind of themes, and things tend to fall into those categories which they really overlap. They're not independent, but it helps sometimes to think which of these might be at play, or sort of more dominantly at play, because you usually can't change everything all at once. So it's helpful to know where to kind of put your energy at first. So the first one I call husbandry for happiness, and that's their lifestyle. So do they get to move freely? Do they get to choose when and how they move ever in their life? Because some horses don't. They only really get to move when they're being controlled by a human being. And there is actually another category that I'll come to in a minute that's to do with movement as well. What about friends? So both human social interactions and with other horses. Their nutrition, and then also the way that their food is delivered is really influential, because they should eat for a large portion of the day. And if they're eating for a large portion of the day is in an unhealthy posture, then that can have all sorts of knock-on effects. Or if they're not eating for a large portion of the day, of course that has lots of knock-on effects. It also includes things like their hoof care. Yeah, sorry.
I just want to ask you some questions about. I think it's good to kind of delve into these a little bit for people. So we'll come back to that, because I think it's really interesting.
Yes, yeah. And then, you could include their hoof care, and whether they're shod or barefoot or in boots, and also it kind of includes their environment. So what surfaces are they walking on? What sort of shelter do they have, and that kind of thing. The second, do you want me to run through all the categories first?
I think it's good to get them as I quite like getting the overview and then diving in, because then you get a complete.
I'm going to make some notes.
I actually was going to get a pen and paper, because I was like, this is quite helpful. But I think go through all of them. So we've had husbandry for happiness. That was the first
that's
one.
just the one category that. So all of those things are in.
So that covers all of
quite
those
a big
things
category.
We've just said. Yeah, but that's
lifestyle,
fine. That's good.
Basically, lifestyle is that's the short way of explaining that one. And then the second one is movement medicine, which obviously does have a lot of influences from their lifestyle, but it also includes how they so their standing and moving posture, so their resting and their movement, and that's free and when we're interacting with them, because that can set up healthy or unhealthy movement patterns, which can predispose to injury, or can be protective. And then, of course, if they already have an injury, it can either help them to recover from it or actually hinder them or give them some secondary compensations that hinder their recovery. So that's the second category. And then the third one I call cultivating comfort, and that's physical, mental, and emotional. Because what we somewhat expect of the horses in our lives is actually a pretty tall order. And they can only really give us that if they are comfortable in their mind, body, and emotions. And that's a somewhat historic thing. And then also in the moment that, there may be some discomfort in some moments. There can't be absolutely zero stress. That's just not realistic in life. But to have that aim of cultivating comfort and a sense of safety. And if they're in pain, then that's not a conducive state really to helping anything. So that's an important point in there. And then the fourth category I call communication, compassion, and consent. So that's to do with how we conduct our relationships with them. And that's where a lot of my cooperative care work, like helping with the needle shyness and foot handling and that kind of thing, comes in. But I think that it affects everything because, that has, overlaps into all of the other areas. And you could talk about things like how emotional state affects posture and or all sorts of things like that, behaviours. Yeah.
Is there any, because obviously that covers a lot and it's a real 360 view, which I think is super interesting. Is there one or two that you think have an outsized impact or that you see causing bigger problems than others?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. Because...
Well done, Rhi. Nice one.
Yeah.
You've got a stump there. Because I guess the reason why it's good to ask a question like that is because this is a lot of information for people, right? And in the work that you and I have done, Lily, although, there's a lot of information given, we're all doing the best that we can. And if we can all just implement some small changes, like I particularly want to talk to you about haynets, because I do think that is one of the things that is like quite a complicated thing, especially for stabled horses. I know like track system hay netting is a slightly different situation, but going back to Rhi's question, like, are there some things within your whole approach that you think really like stand out?
Yeah, I think the lifestyle bit, I would choose that one. And then I'd probably also choose the comfort piece. If you were to just choose two out of them, and if you were to just choose one, I would do the lifestyle bit. Because so many horses have got such an inadequate lifestyle, unfortunately. That is just, that's unfortunately the truth. And a lot have got a wonderful lifestyle, of course. It's very, very influential on them because the way that we tend to keep them traditionally is so poles apart from really what they're adapted to as the type of species that they are. And their bodies and their minds and their emotions find that really difficult to cope with, even after thousands of years. Or maybe not thousands in stables, I suppose. That's more hundreds. But
because it's interesting, isn't it? Because you would think if you brought an animal up in that way, you would think, oh, maybe they just that horse would never know anything different. But it's like that. It's regardless. It's that species appropriate. Regardless of how they started their life, whether they lived in a stable their entire life or not, their species appropriate care is very different from what they're often getting. We talked about this a few times on the podcast about like people really struggling on yards where they just close the turnout for 6 months of the year.
Was the equivalent of like
really stuck.
Sorry, Miri.
You're good. No, you're good.
It's the equivalent of like people keeping a border collie in an apartment in London, and it's like it doesn't matter if that border collie was born there as a puppy; they still have working instincts and energy that's been actually designed by us and our breeding, and it's it's the same with horses. I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to that husbandry for happiness, you talked about the way horses eat. And look, I mean, we could talk for hours about we could go through everything in real detail. But I think for me, haynets are something that I see. And I often, if I see it on social media, a horse eating out of a haynet, and I'm doing a very specific action right now, I'm like pulling my neck back into the back of my collar and bracing all of my frontal muscle, the mandibular muscles, the ones that join the front of your jaw to your collarbone. I'm like tempted to comment on people's videos and be like, oh, just so you know, like the haynet's really high, and if that's for a pony, that pony's basically going to be putting its head on backwards to eat for potentially 12, 14, 16 hours of the day.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about why that's so important? Like why that's something that is key?
Yes. So, like you say, setting up patterns of brace in the body, that can be very unhelpful because they're strengthening certain areas that actually, strengthening is actually not the right word. It is brace and tension in those areas, and they're actually sometimes you'll put your hand on a horse's neck and they will be really sore, interestingly, in the area where we tend to inject with a needle. So there's a reason for needle shyness. Because of something like haynet position. So there are a few things that their habitual eating posture, their eating habit can affect. It's muscle tension and development, their foot comfort and alignment, and their dental alignment as well, and wear. So haynets, there are a few things with the material that you use. So things like nylon, sort of rough nylon-y with knots, haynets. I've seen quite a lot of really notched incisor teeth from the use of those, and sometimes really sore gums as well. So I like to use the knot-free, like the soft mesh type
How
of
does
net.
that work? I'm just imagining, 'cause I don't use haynets, but how does that happen?
Well, actually, different horses tend to use their front teeth differently, or their lips. So some horses are really good at using haynets and they get lots of hay out in one go, and others find it much more difficult and frustrating. So that's another thing, actually. If they're metabolic and they have this perception that they're in a starvation state and then they're not able to get very much hay out of the haynet at a time, that can induce a lot of frustration and kind of attacking the food and a somewhat mixed relationship with food, mixed feelings about it. But yeah, with the incisor wear, they're basically they're habitually rubbing their incisor teeth against the knots or the rough material, and then they can get grooves and notches and sore gums even sometimes, or sometimes food packing. That's also related to their alignment of their molar teeth at the back. But they can get food packing and then gum disease. So then that affects their comfort. So then they might chew differently. So it's really, really important how they tend to habitually eat. The height is important so say, for example, you try and put haynet a bit lower, but they've got sore feet. Then they end up in a sort of a contortion because they're trying not to put too much weight on their feet while they eat. Sometimes a high haynet can be helpful for a short period of time to sort of promote like a reaching posture and actually stretching from the base of their neck, as opposed to that dropped base of the neck and bracing that you're describing. So having a variable height, sometimes hanging the net maybe for half an hour or something up high, or having a tiny one up high and the bulk lower down. But I can't prescribe a height because you have to watch your individual horse. Some horses, and it might change over time as well, as their body changes. So sometimes they might actually need a fairly, what I would call a neutral height. So that would be their eye level with their hip joint would be a good pointer. So not the tubercoxy, that's the bony bit that sticks out that tends to be called the hip, the point of the hip, like the...
That's exactly the one I thought
the bony
of when you
bit.
said hip joint.
So that's not where the hip joint actually is. The hip joint, if you then feel over their pelvis, the the bits either side of their tail, which they are covered in muscle, but they're the points of the buttocks. Those are other bony points on their pelvis. In a diagonal line between the bony, what's called the point of the hip, that you just thought of on the side of the pelvis, in a diagonal line between that and the point of the buttock, that's where the hip is. The hip joint is in there. It can be quite hard to feel in some horses. So it's kind of it's like in the middle of their pelvis if you're looking at them from the side. Yeah. If they have their eye level with there, that's quite a good starting point. And then you can look and see, are there any muscles really bulging? Or do they always stand with their limbs in a particular alignment, for example? So if they don't have their limbs square, it's likely that they've got some restriction somewhere that means that they have to make space because their legs are quite long.
When you say square, because obviously a lot of us see horses where they rest a leg one way or the other. So when you're talking about square limbs, what does that look like for you?
So the limbs are vertical when you're looking at them from the side or from in front or behind. So they can be resting one, but if the one that they are supporting themselves with is vertical, so the cannon bones I would mean are vertical.
Okay. So haynets can be okay.
Yeah, they can be.
The type of haynet and the variable height of them is important. That's really interesting. I think I kind of would have said like, oh, haynet's no bad. You know?
I know. Yeah, me too. It's interesting. It's funny because I don't feed Harley from haynets at home. He, or when we're at home, he like has hay from the floor and then he lives out at night. But when we went to pony camp, I put him in a haynet overnight because obviously I didn't want him to get through everything on the floor. And when I came down in the morning, he'd eaten most from the floor, but only some of the haynet. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I wonder if he saw through his back and that's why he doesn't want to pull. And it was probably actually that it was a really busy environment and a lot of them were quite busy looking at each other. But it just immediately where my mind went to, because I was like, haynets are the devil. But yeah, I think it's as with everything, isn't it? I think especially if you're taking a lot of your learning on the internet, you get thrust into quite extreme spaces, even with barefoot, for example. That's a good example. It's all or nothing. And I think people find that very, very overwhelming. And then they find that they're like, well, I can't do anything right because I can't change all of this stuff. And same with turnout. I think some people are like, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't change this. I can't make it 100% perfect and live on a track and da-da-da. Yeah. So I think it's good for people to hear that there are like middle grounds with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think the rule that I would say is watch your horse, because they will have a preference and then they'll have something that they need now. But then if that's not that healthy long term, and you kind of want to change it, then you want to do that gradually to get to a stage of the ideal scenario. So in an ideal scenario, they would eat with their head low about 80% of the time. And then they would browse a bit. So that's with their head either at their front knees, their carpus level or above, including above their wither height. Mm. So there would be a range so that they get to stretch. Yes. Yeah.
Eating hedge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's really healthy because it gets their body, their neck and their back range of motion and them stabilizing, and it helps with their proprioception and their core strength. But if they don't have any core strength, then we can't expect them to straight away to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually. Like, we've got a horse in at the moment and she has had a very long period of box rest from a really traumatic sarcoid removal. Like, I've never seen a wound like it in my life. Her owner showed me a picture of it the other day and I was like, my God, this horse is a miracle for coming back. But it's really interesting because she goes out in that very, very big field at the front of our property. And I've never seen her go and eat the hedge. Whereas Blondie and Zora, they're always off hedge, grass, hedge, doing various things. So that's really, it's really interesting to sort of, like you say, just watch and start understanding. And if you're seeing those like negative patterns or noticing that tension in the neck, that tension in the neck is such a common thing that I see with horses that come for training. They're not necessarily there because they've got a tight neck. They're there because they are very spooky or the owner is struggling with a certain stage of the training, and actually the body is in a real state of dysfunction, and that muscle, the base of the neck, takes such the brunt of, like,
Yes.
it's one of the places where you see so much, everything kind of is medium, and then that is like really, really, really strong. You said something a minute ago about dental balance and their feet, and we talked about this the last time we had a consultation, and I, like, top of my head fell off and my ears, my brain melted out my ears, because I was like, what? I can't believe this. But can you tell us a bit more about that dental imbalance and the relationship to their feet, because this is wild. Rhi, you ready for some learning? This is mad.
Yeah, and actually I'll just say a thing briefly about the tension in their neck as well, which relates to this, because that real tense, the brachiocephalic muscle, often it is, which is the big one, that if they've got a real U-neck, that's the one that's bulging. It's on the underside. It goes all the way from their head to the front of their shoulder. And that can be really tight if they have foot pain as well, which I think that foot pain or discomfort is massively underappreciated. So I'll just say that, and then we might come back to that at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Something I worry about most days.
Yeah. Yeah, so the link between the dental alignment and their feet. So the whole thing with them eating for a lot of the day is that therefore they're chewing for many hours out of the day. They should be for about 16 to 18 hours, or maybe a bit longer if the foodstuff is even more fibrous. So their jaw is moving for a lot of the day, many hours. And the sockets of the teeth and the jaw joint itself have got a huge number of proprioceptive nerves in them. They're overrepresented within the body. So they're really important for telling the nervous system which way is up, like telling them about gravity and the tilt of the head, and, am I standing on a hill, or all of those kinds of things. And then what happens with that information that goes into the brain is that the brain puts that information back out to decide how to stand. So if you get a dental imbalance, so say, for example, a haynet is placed in the corner of a stable that is a bit downhill, or even that there's a bit of a hole in the floor, and so they constantly stand with one side lower than the other. Or maybe they've got a friend on one side, so their head is always slightly to one side. Over time, because they're chewing sort of to one side constantly, that's going to enter their nervous system over time as somewhat wonky information. So then you'll get wonky output. So you might start to get, for example, a high-low of their feet. There are a few more things involved, but that's a...
So that means like a more upright foot and a flatter
exactly
foot.
That. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there are more connections
unlocked.
than that as well.
New fear unlocked. Sorry. Rhi's going to be like, why did we invite this lady now? I
literally was just thinking about Harley's stable. I was like, how flat is it? Where is his hay? Where's his friends? Fascinating, though. So
and a simple thing that you can do, well, hopefully it's quite a simple thing that you can do to help that, is to maybe have a few haynets dotted around the place. At first, they may well only still eat from their habitual one. So, but don't panic, because they, do tend to explore the place, and you can always stick some interesting things in the haynet. That's actually a useful part of having haynets. You could have some carrot sticks or celery, or like a sprig of hawthorn or something like that, and or some cleavers tucked in there, and then they browse. They explore.
Blondie's favourite.
Yeah.
She loves cleavers. She's obsessed. That's you're a livery yard manager's worst nightmare. They're like, more hay nets, please. No, you see people all the time, don't you? Like, do you think it's reasonable that somebody puts this amount of hay in a hay net? It's a common thread on the livery groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite common for me to advise people on an online consult. More hay, more hay.
Yeah, because restriction is a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because often people talk about like horses like gorging and then being overweight. And I don't know, my experience of this, we had a horse that came, I've had lots like this, but we had this horse that came a while back, and she was quite underweight in my opinion. She looked very lithe, you know, like she could go an event tomorrow, and I don't know, I think she looked underweight from my opinion. And she had haynets, had previously had haynets. I think she had ulcers at the time as well. She kicked the walls when she ate, and it was lots of different symptoms that told me that. But the interesting thing is when we started giving her free choice hay, when I say this horse ate fast, she would eat like it was going to be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And it took probably a fortnight of her realising the hay never ran out. Yep. For her to then regulate herself. Yes. And it's a complicated thing, right? Because if you have a horse that is overweight, but you're trying to restrict them, you almost make a self-serving issue. Because
you do.
You want them to slow down, but they have to choose to slow down by being given the choice to slow down. What's your take on that? Because I think this is something that people come up against a lot. Yes. Like, my pony's fat, I need to restrict them, but then they eat so fast that then they go without for an extended period of time.
Well, I could never give hay like you give it to Harley, because he would just eat it all in 5 minutes, and I'm like, I don't think he would if you kept doing it.
Anyway, go on. Exactly that. So the sort of background to remember with this is that horses are adapted to graze for a large portion of the day because their food source should be quite low value, high fibre. And that's why they need to eat for so much of the day, because they extract a little bit of nutrition and it moves through their gut fairly fast. And actually it comes out the other end without having extracted as much as they could if they had a different type of digestive system. So ruminants, for example, cattle and sheep, they ferment their food for a long time in big vats, big stomach vats. And then they also digest the microbes that, because that's in the front part of their digestion, that's in the first section. So they then get more nutrition. They also ruminate, so they re-chew what they're already processing. So they actually don't graze for as much of the day, and then they lie down and they ruminate for the rest of the day. So that's why they have the difference.
Is that why the cows are lying down?
Yeah.
You know, and they say, the cows are lying down, it's going to rain. No, they're just digesting their grass.
Yeah, they're ruminating. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, so horses, their digestive system needs to be moving. It needs to have this stuff going through, and they extract a little bit of the nutrition from it at a time. The fasting or restricting, so maybe not aiming for fasting, but that might be what effectively happens, because like you say, they guzzle their little bit of sort of weighed out or allowed ration, and then they're standing around with an empty gut for the rest of the time. So that causes all sorts of problems. So ulcers is one thing. Horses also don't have a gallbladder, so they're constantly producing their bile salts. They don't store it. It's just an indication of how often they need to be eating. Through evolution, they've dispensed with this thing because they don't have meal times. They're just constantly trickle feeding. And the thing that the food restriction causes is one, emotional stress and frustration. So you can get that kind of guzzling or attacking a haynet or even food aggression between other horses or towards people. And they have a sense of scarcity. So when it arrives, they're worried about it going away. And it can also set up in their metabolism thinks they're in a starvation state. So what that can actually do...
And that's quite quick. It's quite quick,
yeah. And it can actually increase insulin resistance for that to be the case. Because insulin is a hormone of it's actually sort of a starvation state. It's like winter is coming and we need to drive
fat.
Glucose into the cells. Yes.
And so it's probably relevant to say that like EMS is the horse version of diabetes. Am I quite close in saying that?
Yeah,
similar?
It's similar. Yeah, there are some differences, but it is definitely similar. It's insulin dysregulation. Yes. And I definitely want to be clear that I'm not suggesting that it's okay for an overweight, like laminitis waiting to happen horse to just have free access, because that could be quite dangerous. Because if what they have free access to is starchy or sugary, which sometimes forage can be, and you can't know by looking at it, even if it looks all stalky and brown, it could be sugary. So I'm not suggesting that, but if you know the nutritional analysis, and I know that's easier said than done, then the ideal thing to do is to give free access. But I actually would give it in slow feeder nets or slow feeders. But I would also watch them to make sure that it's not so slow that it increases their frustration. So you might need to slow them down a bit, but not as much as you would like at first. And then you slow them down a bit more when they're less worried about it disappearing. And you make sure that they never run out, even for 10 minutes, because they will start to get a, oh no, I've run out response in their body and in their mind. And then often it's like 2 weeks and they realise it's okay, I can walk away from the haynet now. And that's when you start to get the improvement. And it is difficult. Like, I would definitely seek advice if you've got a horse that's a danger for laminitis or something, because you may need to really tailor your approach. But after that, so what am I trying to say? If you restrict them, then all that's going to happen is at some point there will be a rebound, because they'll break through a fence, or someone will give them a massive armful of hay, there'll be a miscommunication, or they'll move homes and somebody won't realise how much they've been restricted, and they will pile on the pounds, and they'll have laminitis, or all of those kinds of scenarios. It's not a sustainable solution to restrict their food. And so how is it a solution? Because you might get some weight loss, and then what? So you're restricting them. What will you restrict them forever? And they're in a constant state of physiological and emotional stress over it. It's just not really a solution. And it was actually a patient of mine that alerted me to that, because the owner was diligently following the advice that I'd been taught to give, and I thought was, that is the standard advice. Weigh your hay, soak it, feed less than 1.5% of their body weight as dry matter intake. And she was diligently following the advice, and the insulin was rising and rising and rising and rising. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it's helping. It's just not a long-term solution. And in that case, it wasn't a short-term solution either.
I just wanted to take a brief moment to discuss one of the sponsors of our podcast today, Equilibrium products. Now, I have been using Equilibrium brushing boots for an extended period of time. We use them a lot when we are introducing horses to each other. They have this amazing fabric that is very, very breathable, and they have in fact passed rigorous testings to prove how breathable they are. And the good thing about that is we have to be very careful, don't we, how hot our horses' legs get, and especially if you are turning horses out and you are wanting them to be keeping those boots on for potentially an extended period of time, I'm very mindful of what effect that could have on the temperature of their legs. That is why we choose to use the Tri-Zone brushing boots from Equilibrium, because they're so breathable. Even if the horse has been wearing them all day in the field while they're integrating with their new friends, you don't get sweaty legs, you don't get superheated tendons, and we can feel comfortable that we are protecting their legs in case when they are integrating that they need to, work things out between them, that they are still protected. They also have a really cool shock absorbing kind of feel to them, and I have actually had horses that have come to have a little disagreement between them, and they have remained very well protected on their legs. So I do highly recommend the Tri-Zone brushing boots. I think they are a fabulous piece of technology, and so we are very grateful to have Equilibrium products sponsoring this podcast. It's a very complicated thing for people, isn't it? Because sometimes you kind of get into this cycle, and it can be difficult to break it. I think another thing to mention in this moment is, there are some body types of horses, I see this a lot, they are not designed to look like a thoroughbred.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got this lovely cob with us, and when she was at a previous yard, they were giving her, she was out during the night and then in during the day with a one soaked haynet, right? And she wasn't even really eating it because it was being soaked for too long, so it was a bit sort of stale and it wasn't really very good. She came to me, she was really girthy, she was really like aggravated. And the reality is they were trying to change her body to something it would never be. Because she's round, she's a round shape. If she looked how they had thought she should look, she would definitely have ulcers. She would definitely be like deprived in different parts of her body. And I've seen this a lot with natives. They should look quite like soft, right? Like their skin isn't like stuck to their body. And this comes from this deprivation. From what I've seen of people like, oh, I want them to be like super lithe, super fit, super like stringy. And I think sometimes it's like, actually, again, going back to that like species appropriate, they would maybe drop off in the winter, but they were never going to look like a runner bean, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's really difficult to tell their body condition by just looking at them. You really need to feel them. Because, looking, because of the body types thing. And also whether it's fat or is it muscle or... sometimes when horses do lose weight from a dietary restriction, they're actually losing muscle mass. It's not even really helping with their, with their unhealthy stored fat. So they might still have quite a lot of fat in their abdomen.
Or they look like they have a big tummy, but they've got absolutely no top line. And people are like, oh, they're really fat. And I'm like, well, you can see all the ribs are there. And this was something, we had a conversation with someone from British Horse Feeds. They came out and they taught me a bit about body scoring. And actually that you body score from like 2/3 of the way up. That's where you score their body. The bit below that is generally just about like core strength. And then the part above that is about the muscle, the fat, the top line, that side of things. So that's another really interesting place where people, I guess, can become aware.
Yes. Yeah, you need to put your hands on your horse to assess their body condition for sure. Yeah.
I had a question that I asked you prior to starting, and it was, what's the most common issue that you see in traditionally managed horses? I mean, I think maybe we've already answered that about the kind of the way that horses are kept, because you talked about movement medicine.
Yes.
Can you go into a bit more detail about that, and maybe a bit about like things that people can be doing that you really recommend, like good exercises or...
Yeah, so and that's actually an important thing to do with weight loss, is that it's not just to do with dietary restriction, but the exercise and movement is really important, and it's insulin sensitizing, and it's helpful for their muscles and their fascia and all of that thing.
That's really interesting. About that part. So we've had a pony with us recently that's had a really serious repetitive case of laminitis. And one of the things, so she was lame in her front feet and very uncomfortable, very poor solar depth. And as in, like, her pedal bones were very near to the ground. And she's had shoes and all of these different things. But one of the things that was recommended was restricted movement. Because, I guess, she was unsound. She's in pain. But... what you were just saying is restricted movement increases insulin sensitivity. So actually,
track livery divider, isn't it? Because you see track liveries talking about laminitic horses walking
and
around
letting them
unsound and letting them just feel their way.
Yes,
and we've really struggled with this pony, because they've encouraged us to have her in a pen. And then I'm like, yeah, but then she's not really moving herself. And we're doing some in-hand walking with her. But then when we took her back to the vets this week, I was like, come on, right, I'm going to confront this. Can we increase the movement now so the pony can start mending her own body?
Yes.
Was that the right thing to say to them? It feels like the right thing for the pony. Like, intuitively, that's what feels good, but...
Yeah, so there's sometimes this is easier said than done, but it's important to try and make a distinction between what stage of laminitis are they in, because it is really important to restrict their movement if they are in an acute fragile laminae stage of laminitis, because then you can get the tearing of the laminae. So if they're in the stage where their feet are on fire basically, and they're really, really inflamed and the laminae are really fragile, then you do not want to be encouraging loads of movement, because you could do a lot of damage inside their hoof capsule. It's a little bit easier said than done, because sometimes it can be hard to tell exactly what stage of laminitis they're in, especially if they've been chronically laminitic. Have they tweaked something in their foot because they don't have a very healthy, strong foot structure, and that's why they're suddenly lame, but they're chronically laminitic, and so movement is going to help them? Or are they now acutely laminitic, and we need to make sure that we don't cause any tearing and damage? So that requires sometimes quite a lot of diagnostics to make that distinction, because I think that low-grade chronic laminitis is also quite under-diagnosed. So, any foot pain, first of all, assume it's laminitis, because if you move them too much, or a fracture, I suppose, because if you move them too much, it will be dangerous to them. So then find out what it is, and then if it's not dangerous to move them, I mean, really, most things are helped by movement, apart from an unstable fracture or laminitis. Other than that, you can move them, and it helps with blood flow, and it helps to give the tissues some feedback on which direction they're supposed to be healing in. It strengthens tissues in the feet. But yeah, it's really important to know that it's safe to move them, and then by all means, movement is more helpful. So it's quite traditional to put a horse when they're sore on box rest, but we need to think about that, because actually for quite a lot of things, it's counterproductive. They might heal with a load of scar tissue that gives them a really shortened tendon or something, because they're not moving it enough, to actually give the body the information for how it should be healing, or we're not getting enough blood flowing and that kind of thing. So when it comes to their foot function and comfort, movement is really, really important, because the hoof responds to loading, cyclic loading, so placing weight on it and then taking weight off. But so not just standing on it, it's got to be a stride of placing weight on it and taking the weight off again. That helps to pump the blood around, and it gives the tissues feedback on how to grow. So it's quite common when you said, I was really trying to mull over that question, what's the most common problem you see amongst traditionally managed horses? Because there are lots of things. But I guess maybe the thing that is often, once you see it, you can't unsee it, but it's often not really appreciated, is weak feet. It's very, very rare for me to see a really healthy foot, especially in a confined horse. I mean, it's almost unheard of. They've got some kind of reflection of the fact that they don't move around enough. And with metal shoes, I'm not against shoes, because they definitely have their place. But one of the things that it can cause is not enough feedback, because it's holding the foot rigid. So if you've got a chronic laminitic case, or a horse that's recovered from like the dangerous phase of laminitis, then you want to give the foot that stimulus, and then it can start to strengthen and be more resilient to insult in the future. And then also that exercise is helpful for their insulin regulation. So sorry, that was a very roundabout answer to that question.
I think that leads us really well onto definitely talking a bit about barefoot feet, because I know that was something that we probably wanted to touch on, and maybe we'll get you back to talk if we have a proper barefoot episode, because we have promised people that we will do that. But could you touch on a little bit what you mean by you rarely see a healthy hoof, or in a confined horse? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's like the warning signs, what maybe people can be looking for.
Yes. So I'm not so much talking about, maybe what comes to mind when I say that is something like an infection or crumbling feet, that kind of thing. And I'm not so much talking about that. So that is, I do see that for sure. Things like thrush in the feet, or the feet chip easily and things like that. So that can be, actually that's, diet is very influential on that. And that can certainly happen. But the thing that I mean by that is where they actually have quite weak internal structures in the foot. So they don't really have a nice pad that they can land on. And then they tend to walk around, again, this is something once you see it, it's hard to unsee it. They're walking around quite carefully on their feet because everything's jarring through the things like the bones and the tendons, which actually shouldn't have all of that concussive force on them. So it's usually the back of the foot that is weak. Horses should have this spongy thing at the back called the digital cushion. And it's like a pad, it's like a dog's pad. It's an analogous structure to that, but it's on the inside. And the frog is really important in so like the same thing in a different situation. It's it's like the same kind of structure, but it obviously looks different. But if you think about each pad on a dog's paw, that's like a really squishy, shock absorbing pad is what it is. And the frog should be that, with the cushion. The digital cushion is inside the foot, so above that, and it's underneath the bony column. So they should be landing on a nice pad of their frog and the digital cushion, and they've got some cartilage in their foot. And what happens when they land on that nice pad is that it gives lots of feedback. So when I talked about the proprioception in their jaw and their teeth earlier, that's also the case in their feet. It's another really important area. And another one, which I also touched on earlier, is their poll, the little muscles around the top of their head. So that's why pullback injuries when tied and strong restraint through headgear is very influential. That's what I was referring to when I said about an incident of restraint via their head having lots of knock-on effects. So what it leads to is either good or not so good information going to their brain about how they should then organise their body. And so you can have all sorts of compensation patterns in their body set up. If their feet are actually a bit wonky, then you get the wonky input leading to the wonky output. And then you also just have the comfort thing, because they don't have... They're landing they're just splatting down on their quite weak foot, and it's not really supporting all of those structures. So could open a whole can of worms, but things like suspensory desmitis, that will be really affected by the health of the back of their foot. And so these injuries are usually not kind of out of the blue. They're from a habitual postural movement thing.
And I think the reason why it took place in Blondie is because nobody really wanted to trim her back feet, because everybody was a bit frightened of her. And actually it only really became very aware of that when she was much more trusting of my current farrier, and he brought her leg forward and he was touching her whole body. His back was on her tummy and her leg was over his leg, and I'm there like, oh my god, he's gonna die in 2 minutes and everything. And she was just like, yeah, I trust this man and this is absolutely fine. And he was able to bevel the toe, not the wall, but take the toe, like we spoke about in our consultation where you talked about how to change her foot balance. And we have been able to now shift her posture, and her posture is far better. But that wasn't possible because of the way that she was being trimmed before. And so when talking about that digital cushion, when you add a metal shoe, does that digital cushion become activated at walk? Is it touching the ground, or is it actually just null and void, not happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it can take it out of interaction with the ground, because you're raising the frog, which is meant to give a lot of feedback in there, is raised. So the weight is only being borne on the rim, on the wall of the foot. There are different arrangements of metal shoes with various pads and things like that can actually help in those situations, depending on how they're applied. That's really important, how they're applied, because you need to align the foot around the joints inside. Otherwise, you might actually make things worse by doing that. But there are arrangements that can actually enhance that function if they need the support of a metal shoe. That is sometimes the case. But a really important thing with the digital cushion actually is that movement in general, and especially when they're babies, is really important for growing a healthy one in the first place. And they can improve later on in life, certainly. But we really need to think about how we raise our foals for growing a really good, healthy foot in the first place. Enough digital
Because
cushion growing.
They're designed to roam, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they would be covering quite large distances, and foals would be frolicking around and growing their feet strong when they're free roaming. So the thing of sort of wrapping your foal in cotton wool and keeping them in a stable is really quite unhelpful for growing their feet.
Yeah, like the lot of like barn kept.
Yes.
You know, they spend a long time in a barn because it's safe or it's wet or it's whatever. Actually, like let them go and move their bodies. So we're kind of overarching theme of let them move their bodies is really, really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hence why I found it difficult to say one of those categories I mentioned earlier. But the lifestyle bit, I suppose, that encompasses it. So in trying to, and I know that there can be real practical barriers to people changing aspects of their horse's lifestyle. So I'm really keen to not just talk about the ideal, but how you can realistically introduce things like that in your current possible situation. I actually run an online workshop. I need to release some more dates for it, but it's called a tuned assessment, and it's how I will look at each individual horse and also the situation and decide what can we actually put into place now, because it's all very well talking about the ideal when that's really not possible right now. And so it's most helpful to give people things that they can actually do.
They can do. And I think that this is really important, right? Because there'll be a lot of people listening to this podcast today, and they will be, I'm not tooting our horn, but I just mean there'll be a lot of people, the ones that do listen, thinking, I'm on a livery yard, I'm finding this very difficult. But if there are enough people that start to say, this needs to change, that is going to be how things start to shift, right? Like, oh, we don't feel comfortable with this. They'll leave that livery yard and they'll go to the one that offers, they have less horses there, it's more expensive, but they always have turnout, you know, or that the facilities aren't as good. I don't have a fancy indoor school, but my horse does get to live in the field for as much of the year. And if people, one thing they can take from this is you got to be confident in your learning. So like you're learning something today from Lily, you can take that away and say, actually, you know, that doesn't sit quite right with me. I want to maybe do something about that. And that's the power. That's where people can then take back that responsibility for their horse and really make positive change for the whole industry too. Because if more people are saying that's the way we want to do things, then the livery yards are going to have to shift their perspective and maybe do something different.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like my head's going to fall off. I've learnt so many new things.
I know, it's so good. But even just what you were saying, like, even if, I mean, God forbid this is the case, but if your horse is in 24 hours a day and they've got haynets and the floor's uneven and you're thinking, my God, I don't know where to begin. Well, one, like, the fact that we can even spend a bit of time looking at our horses and how they move their own bodies and what muscles are activating. Because we're all used to looking for cuts and bruises and heat and swelling and things, but it's just looking at them in a different way, perhaps. And also, if that is you, maybe change yards immediately. But
yeah, hand in notice right now. Goodbye.
Yeah, but yeah, just spending time looking at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing at a time, everybody. We're all doing our best, and that's why we're
Lily,
here.
I have one question that I want to ask you, and it was not a question. It's kind of like a rounding off, maybe.
Yes.
If you could say one thing to every horse person in the world, what would it be?
I think it would be trust what your horse is telling you. Because I get a lot of people who say, I've asked professionals about this multiple times. I'm worried that my horse is in pain and that's why they're showing such and such a behaviour. Am I just being, insert word here for what a professional may have said? I hear a lot of, just get on and ride and just work them through it. And I don't think I've failed to find something. You know, they are telling you, they don't make stuff up. So yeah, trust. If you're worried that your horse is not comfortable or not functioning properly, then trust that gut feeling, because you will be right.
That's lovely.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. I remember seeing something the other day, and it was a comment on someone else's post. There's a problematic horse, and somebody said, and it was talking about like veterinary investigation, saying, "Oh, we're going to do this is what we're going to do," and somebody had commented and said, "What if you can't afford that?" If that was the case, and somebody's come to you and they said, "My horse is," they've said, "Oh, the horse is in a lot of pain. I can't afford." I know what my answer is, but what would be your take in that moment? Because I know that is definitely a limitation for people.
Yeah, well, of course, getting a specific diagnosis is really necessary in some cases. So, say for example, when I used to work in emergency practice, I definitely had to get a very specific diagnosis, because I needed to decide, am I taking this dog into surgery? And if so, where am I opening them up? So that's obviously really, really, really important in some cases to get a specific, definitive diagnosis. Sometimes, and this might sound like sacrilege coming from a vet, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just have to actually think, there is something going on here, and now we start a process of trial and error to see what helps. So you might make some management changes, and you might introduce some treatments that have a low risk of side effects. So if you're not quite on target, it's not going to actually do any harm. That's important, to not do harm in the process. And actually, there's a huge amount that we can tell just on examining and observing horses. And then the more expensive and sometimes invasive diagnostics, I really actually strongly feel that they need to not be just a routine. This is what we do in every horse. They need to be targeted to, okay, we really are suspicious that it's here, and now we want to see what's there, rather than going through a whole, you just basically do a whole bunch of tests, and because you're not really sure where to start. And that, I don't mean to sound, that might sound really disparaging, and I don't mean to sound like that. What I mean to say is that to be helpful to your horse, you don't necessarily actually have to spend loads on the diagnostic workup. You might sometimes, but it's not necessarily the case. And there is a huge amount that you can tell from just examining them as well.
And from slowing down a lot, I think.
Yes.
Again, going back to that initial point, just don't try to keep doing the hard thing.
Yes.
Let's track back. Like, can you walk in hand in a nice soft way? Often just shifting a horse's posture, right, can make such an enormous difference, like how they're doing things. And this, we could talk for hours, Lily, so maybe we shouldn't, but like, I think sometimes the hard thing is people will get this information from their vet, and then the rehabilitation plan that they're given is very like, walk for this long. I was talking about it with a client today, and it's like, yeah, but how? Like you're saying, be aware of how your horse is then doing that walking, because walking with their neck on backwards, practically looking over their tail, isn't going to help them if they've, it isn't going to bring that change, reset as such. So, yeah, that's a piece of advice I often give people, is it's not just what you're doing, it's how you're doing it and the softness in which the horse is carrying, I guess.
That's so important, yes. That's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because, lunge for 10 minutes, you could actually do a huge amount of damage, or you could do something really therapeutic, depending on how you do it. So it really is not, that's very true, it's really not what you do, it is how you do it. It's some of what.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got to be doing the thing, but it's also how you're doing it as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think what we've definitely confirmed today is that we'd like to have you come back and talk more about all of the other questions that we likely have.
Yeah, I'd be delighted.
And I'll just say that if anybody is interested to work with Lily or has any questions or anything, we will put Lily's website in the show notes, but you can just Google Nurturing Nature Equine and find out all about what Lily does and talk to her personally one-to-one. I hope you are inundated now, Lily, with people, because I think what you do is truly like changing the industry, and I hope that people like yourself get more
visibility.
Word's gone. Visibility. Exactly.
Yeah, thanks.
It's very cool. It's been a really interesting conversation, especially as someone who came to it being like, well, I've never looked at this side of equine before, and also, and this is not to be disparaging to any other experts in this space, but often when we think about this side of equestrianism that Miri and I often talk about, it is seen as woo-woo and fluffy and blah blah blah, and with that comes a sense that like these people don't have credentials, they're just all holistic and actually you're like, no, I train traditionally, I have all the same qualifications, I've just realised that I think there is a better way, and I think that is industry, that is future innovation, that's how industry should work. We should constantly be learning and changing and thinking about the way that we do things. So I think it's nice to be like able to push back on some of those and say it's not just random people who've decided that they want to be quote unquote fluffy. This is what innovation looks like, and it's what innovation should be like. Anyway,
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
get off my pedestal now.
Love that, definitely.
No,
Well,
it's been
thank you so
fascinating.
much, so much, Lily, for spending some time with us this afternoon. And yeah, we will see you guys for next week. I can't remember what the topic is, but we will.
But it'll be something great.
You'll find out at the time. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Goodbye for now.
Bye.